Western civilization began to blossom 2,500 years ago in the small Greek state of Attica, and in particular its capital city, Athens. However, in the early part of the 5th century BC, Athens nearly disappeared. The Acropolis, one of the most famous historical sites in the world, was in ancient times the political and religious heart of the city. But in 480 BC, the buildings on the Acropolis were burned to the ground. The people of Athens had been overwhelmed by an invading army of approximately 1 million Persians, commanded by their fearsome and illustrious king, Xerxes I. Athenians deserted the city, and the Persians occupied it. It seemed that Athens was finished, and yet, over the course of the next 50 years, the city emerged as the cultural capital of the entire Greek world and the cradle of contemporary Western science and philosophy. The Acropolis was rebuilt in grand style. By 430 BC, it boasted some of the finest monuments in the world, most notably the Parthenon, the temple of Athena Parthenos. How did Athens rise like a phoenix from the ashes to become one of the greatest cities of ancient times? And who were the leaders, architects, and artists that gave this place its special quality, unique in history? After the Persians finally left Athens, a leader emerged in 460 who would guide the city to cultural and military preeminence in the Greek world. He was Pericles, and he's credited not only with bringing about major political reform toward democracy, but also in rebuilding the army and creating some of the most beautiful monuments of all time. Under Pericles' 30 years in office, the Acropolis complex destroyed by the Persians was completely rebuilt. Its principal edifice was the Parthenon, but there were also dozens of smaller temples, each a masterpiece of design and execution. Pericles led the city into its golden age and made the name of Athens immortal. This was an era of great artists like the sculptor Phidias. It was also a time when philosophers like Socrates and Plato contemplated fundamental truths in their schools. In the theatre, Sophocles and Euripides laid the foundations of tragic and comic drama. Almost every aspect of modern Western civilization, even sport, began in 5th century Athens. Pericles died of a lingering fever in 429 after an outbreak of plague the previous year, which killed 1/4 of the Athenian population. However, his accomplishments lived on. Athens was the pinnacle of a dynamic society which had been developing for thousands of years. Greece is a land of spectacular landscapes. The ancient Greeks believed the woods and the waters were populated by gods and goddesses and other supernatural creatures. In fact, in ancient times, the region was inhabited by a surprising range of real creatures. The first people to inhabit Greece arrived nearly 2,000 years before Christ, at the beginning of the Bronze Age. They belonged to a branch of the great Indo-European stock that migrated from the vast plains which stretched from Europe to Asia. The earliest Greeks were warrior tribes who shared a common language but fought incessantly with each other, struggling for possession of the richest and most fertile land. The first settlements were primitive rural communities. Then, between 1500 and 1200 BC, there was a population explosion, resulting in rapid advances in culture and technology. Palaces and temples sprang up, evidence of which we can still see today. They were an appropriate setting for mythical stories, like those of the poet Homer, and the tales of adventure like the voyage of the Argonauts and the trials of Heracles. Many of these stories are more fiction than fact, but one is thought to be true: Homer's epic tale, the Iliad, which told of the war of the Greeks against the Trojans. Troy was the city that fell to a wooden horse filled with Greek warriors. But did Troy exist? Until modern times, the city and the war were believed to be merely legends. But in 1870, Heinrich Schliemann, an amateur German archaeologist, began to uncover the ruins of Troy. The city had indeed been destroyed by a great coalition formed by the major city-states of continental Greece. It was a rare coalition. They were usually at war with each other.